Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had been and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children. Music, television, books.
Prey on children's innocence.
How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there. And no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
About time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
You don't connect the dots, just a mass of what's all this about.
You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. tstradio.info is the website. If you would like to find our full show archive of past shows, you can listen and stream and download those shows for free. For those of you who would like to contact the Secret Teachings, you can email rdgable@yahoo.com. And you can also find us on social media. The links are on the website or below on whatever platform you are listening to the show on. And if you are in the ad-free archive, a special thanks for subscribing to not only get access to the ad-free show, but to get access to a lot of other things too, including montages, documents, etc. And you're also supporting the show and keeping us on air Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. If you missed our Friday episode, a 4-hour plus special looking into 2 internet con artist frauds, one of which we went into their criminal background and looked at the records. All of that is in the video. If you missed that, go back into the archive, even if you just listen to it, which would help the show out. But if you go and listen and watch the free video, which is on our YouTube page, you will see all the documents that we presented you on that show with. And I think that show probably could warrant a part 2, considering that there's a lot more that we did not get into, and people have been asking me questions about that. So maybe we'll do a part 2 on that at some point in the near future. Otherwise, this is a little treat for those of you who are watching me right now. That's right, you are watching me. If you're listening in the audio-only archive, you might wonder why we have a video show tonight. That's because we have a lot of documents and a lot of records that we need to show on this episode. And so we are putting together a video presentation tonight. You will see this on our YouTube page as well as our other pages when I promote it and push it and publish it after the audio show goes live in the archive. So either way, and no matter how you're listening, thank you for tuning into the show. Tonight's title, tonight's subject, Who is Like Unto the Beast? A reference to the book of Revelation, of course. Some of you may have seen this. I think it's been making the rounds on social media. The story of a MrBeast, as his internet handle, as his fame identifies him as, otherwise known as Jimmy Donaldson, who's considered the world's #1 creator. MrBeast does a lot of stuff online, giving a lot of money away, looking, based on his videos, like he's a philanthropist. He's been to the pyramids at Giza, just like the other beast, Aleister Crowley, visited the pyramids. Another reason tonight's show is called Who is Like Unto the Beast, because there's more than one beast. It's not just MrBeast, the world's #1 content creator, who has recently partnered with the Rockefeller Foundation, which financed the sexual revolution, which was inspired directly by Aleister Crowley, the Beast. And if you look at the Rockefellers, the actual family of Rockefellers, they, in their older years, looked also kind of like a beast, or maybe like a ghoul from Fallout. I think David Rockefeller kind of looked like a ghoul. I think some of the original Rockefellers kind of looked like ghouls. They lived a very, very long time. Maybe all that philanthropy is good for the heart and the mind and the body. But who is connected to all of this? MrBeast, Rockefeller Foundation, Aleister Crowley, the Beast, is the Central Intelligence Agency, and various other groups, agencies, philanthropy. I can't say the word. People like the Rockefellers that claim to be philanthropists, and they do a lot of work in villages and small communities and poor countries. Philanthropy is a cover, as most of you already probably know, for secretive, covert operations. It's a cover for people that do really bad stuff. If you don't know, I assume most of you know, but if you don't know, a lot of people claim to be philanthropists, and they have a really shady background. Now, if you were a bad person, if you were stealing resources, if you were sterilizing people, if you were murdering people, if you were doing really bad things, and you wanted to, like the mafias of the world, you wanted to obtain a little bit better PR, you donate some money to some charities, a little bit here, a little bit there. You run a foundation that wants to help poor kids. And it plays well in the media, it plays well with the PR. What it is psychological warfare, because people know who the Rockefellers are. They know who Aleister Crowley was. They know what the CIA has been involved in. But when you do these types of things through the lens of philanthropy, it sounds really good. It sounds better because you're helping people. And those are the kinds of things, like in an abusive relationship of any kind, when someone is very abusive mentally or physically, could be a relationship of a romantic nature, it could be even a business relationship for that matter, but someone who is verbally or physically assaulting you, essentially psychologically torturing you, but gaslighting you and projecting back onto you that it's actually your fault, you're responsible for it, classical gaslighting. This is the kind of thing that we see done in media. This is the kind of thing we see done in politics. This is the kind of thing we see done in pretty much every sector and level of society. We see the psychological tactics that the CIA has used, the Rockefeller Foundation has used, the Beast has used. A lot of it has to do with sex and sexual trauma. We see those tactics being employed because they've been perfected, I believe, on an unsuspecting, for the most part, unsuspecting population, not just in the United States, but globally. So when I see a story like MrBeast partners with Rockefeller Foundation, I'm not the only one who thinks that's suspicious. I'm not the only one who thinks, also, to be objective, you got a guy who's extremely famous, a guy who has been known on the internet for a very, very long time. He is the world's #1 creator. Why wouldn't the Rockefeller Foundation partner with someone like this? And considering that there are some people, a very small handful of people, that have looked into the background of MrBeast and the people that, and the groups that finance and fund his, I guess you could call it a movement, organization. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions and millions of billions of dollars. We're talking money that is kind of hard to fathom, money that is kind of hard to grasp, to understand. MrBeast makes about $700 million a year. And you might wonder where all of that money comes from. A lot of people think, oh, he just made some money on YouTube. I mean, that means YouTube made 300 million and he made about $1 billion because they collect about 30%, I believe it is. MrBeast brings in about $700 million a year. He's been criticized for giving very little to charity. He's also been propped up for giving a lot of money to charity. It's all PR. And of course, anytime someone like this is very, very popular and very, very well known and very wealthy, public conspiracy theorists get suspicious, understandably so. People get suspicious, especially if they've made a YouTube channel and they can't get anybody to watch their videos, and then they see MrBeast making all this money and he must work for the feds. People have accused me of working for the feds. People have accused me of working for the FBI or the CIA. Utterly absurd, baseless, ridiculous claims, but because someone else does better than you, they must be working for the feds. This is something that I think needs to be said, because this is an accusation that gets leveled against pretty much anybody on the internet who's doing better than you in regard to their popularity. And MrBeast is an example of this. He's probably the best example of this. He's going to naturally, because of his position, his fame, and his wealth, he's naturally going to be an easy target for those kinds of accusations. So I want to be very clear that that's not why I am talking about MrBeast tonight on the show. I'm not talking about him because he's making billions of dollars or because he's working with the Rockefeller Foundation and he's a philanthropist and he's a good guy. I'm talking about him because I could acknowledge and separate the fact that there are people who are delusional, who think that everybody on the internet is a fed. And then there is legitimate concern for the background of the Rockefeller Foundation, who MrBeast is, what he promotes, the money that is involved in the stuff that he does. And there's a huge difference between someone working directly or indirectly with an agency or an organization to sway public opinion and people that are just idiots on the internet. And don't be fooled. You know, people talk about the dead internet theory. They say, well, half the internet's dead and most of it's bots and a lot of it's, federal agencies. And yeah, there's a lot of that, but there's equally a very large number of people who are just idiots and have no idea what they're talking about. And because they have, a record button, they have a microphone, they can say whatever they want. And if you know how to manipulate search engines and you know how to get your content out there, you can have nothing to say, but you can become very famous and popular because you know what buttons to push, or you know how to game the system, or you know how to pay a lot of money for advertising. There's a lot of content out there like that. So that's my initial, analysis and thought of a creator, let's say, as they call him, like MrBeast. He's into philanthropy. His charitable organization is called Beast Philanthropy. And again, his name is Jimmy Donaldson. I think everybody knows this guy. Anytime I've seen him, I've always thought that he had one of those weird looks or one of those weird smiles on his face, not because, again, he's rich or famous or something like that, just because I don't know. He just has that look. And I'm not the only one who says this or thinks this. A lot of people think this. You look at this guy and you're thinking, there's just something off about him. Maybe there's not. I don't know. Maybe there's not something off about him. But you can usually tell when you look at somebody. You look at a MrBeast, and this is purely subjective, But you look at MrBeast and you look at that face and you compare it to, say, I don't know, you compare it to a David Rockefeller. You compare it to a Henry Kissinger. People that you look at and you're like, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I can trust this person. Purely subjective, but maybe it's not so purely subjective. Maybe there is a hint of objective pollutant in it, because it is kind of true. You know, like when a woman is pregnant, she radiates. When a woman is ovulating, she radiates a kind of a light, a glow. It could be hormones. It could hormones in the sense of like, or pheromones that you smell and you see this woman is more attractive when she's ovulating, or she's got new life inside of her, so she's radiating outward. It's definitely a result of hormonal changes and things like that. Then you look at people that do really bad things, and you look at like David Rockefeller, and you think, yeah, I don't know if that's a good guy. And he was old. Rockefeller was very, very old, right? But that doesn't mean that he doesn't look evil even in his younger days. There's a look in his eyes too. There's a similar kind of a look, like they're trying to smile, but they don't really know how to smile. Again, largely subjective, but there's a hint of objective pollutant in there somewhere. So this is MrBeast, and this is what he does. He is a very famous, quote, content creator. I think most of you know that. I think it goes without saying. We can pull up on YouTube MrBeast, and you can see his hundreds of millions, billions of views at pretty much any video that he publishes, tens of millions of views, including doing some very risky stunts like putting people in burning buildings and seeing if they can escape, going into old nuclear bunkers, things like that. So again, I know that most of you know that, but we have to form kind of a base foundation for the show, especially for people who don't know about this. This video that you see on your screen right now, and if you can't see it because you're listening in the audio archive, this is MrBeast alongside of the man who runs the Rockefeller Foundation. And they are speaking about the partnership that they have. Let's listen to this video. Let's see what this partnership is all about with the head of the Rockefeller Foundation.
I'm Rod Shaw, president of the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm here today with Jimmy Donaldson, better known as...
And the video is just
and we are together.
Let me go back because the video froze.
Rockefeller Foundation. I'm here today with Jimmy Donaldson, better known as...
Oh, it froze again.
And we are together, the Rockefeller Foundation and MrBeast, launching a great new partnership together. Yes, we're going to try to inspire the youth all around the world, change lots of lives, lots of big projects coming up. We'll tell you more about it in the future, but I'm honored to be working with the Rockefeller Foundation, and let's change the world. And we're excited to work with Jimmy and his awesome team. They are already helping kids in Africa and around the planet. We're going to take that to the next level together, and we couldn't be more excited.
Oh, yeah. Very, very excited. The Rockefeller Foundation loves helping children, if you are not aware of that. They really like helping kids. They don't have any shady past whatsoever. Not at all. They're really, really good people at the Rockefeller Foundation. If you look at the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, this guy.
Hi, I'm Rod Shaw, president of the Rockefeller Foundation.
In my opinion, he also looks like he has that kind of fake look. And I'll also say for the record that when you see the video of MrBeast and the president of the Rockefeller Foundation and MrBeast is doing the, quote, devil horns, I don't think that that means he's a Luciferian Satanist or something like that. So I'd like to clarify that before we go further, because there's a lot of people that say that, if you go to a Texas Longhorns game, they're all a bunch of Satanists. You go to a rock concert, they're all Satanists. Anybody who does that hand gesture is a Satanist. I got to be careful. If I do it, someone will take a screenshot of that and say, Ryan's a Satanist. It's really, really stupid. A lot of people do that hand gesture that doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. I'd be more concerned with what the Rockefeller Foundation's history is and its connections to another beast, aka Aleister Crowley, who was indirect but also kind of direct in inspiring the Rockefeller Foundation to fund sexual revolution, which included research into pedophilia and research into, well, child abuse, essentially, in the name of sexual liberation. We'll get to that here in the first hour of the show. We also have a guest coming up in the second hour tonight. Ryder Lee will be joining us in hour number 2. So what is this partnership before we go any further? The partnership is about taking MrBeast's storytelling abilities and merging them with the influence of the Rockefeller Foundation to inspire and to help children. According to the Rockefeller Foundation website, this strategic partnership between the Rockefeller Foundation and the Beast Philanthropy Foundation is designed to meet young people where they are online and channel their desire for purpose into meaningful global action. So that sounds, good. If you're a good person, if you're a decent human being, you want to help people, that sounds like a good thing. Well, a lot of young people are online. That's where most people are. That's where the kids are nowadays. So if you can help those poor kids online and you have hundreds of millions of dollars, why not help those kids online, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We want to help kids. Who's going to stop you from helping kids? So it always sounds good. The strategic partnership is designed to meet young people where they are online and channel their desire for purpose into meaningful global action. Now, I'll remind you that there are a lot of groups and foundations and people that want to channel a young person's desire for meaningful action. A lot of groups that want to do that type of a thing. A lot of groups that want to help children. They just want to help children. Why would you not want them to help children? Some of those groups include, like, for example, you could go to their website and look this up. You know the guy that worked very, very, very closely with Jeffrey Epstein and a number of other individuals that are currently in the Trump administration? Les Wexner, the billionaire who said he's possessed by a demon named dybbuk, which is an old Jewish demon that makes him crave wealth and crave women and crave power and cars and houses and things like that. That Lex Luthor, Les Wexner, he also has a foundation. He wants to help people too. A guy who literally says he's possessed by a demon. He's donated a lot of money, a lot of helping, a lot of children saved, right? A lot of kids. They saved a lot of kids. The Wexner Foundation was founded in the 80s. If you go to the Wexner Foundation website, the Wexner Foundation website, they say that their philanthropy goes into things like LGBTQ, climate, racism. Interesting. The kinds of things that young, impressionable kids that want to do the right thing would probably get involved in, because it sounds really good. You want to help people. You want to help people that are gay get, quote, rights. You want to help the climate because it's just really hot today. You want to stop racism, things like that. Well, that's what the Wexner Foundation does. That's what they promote. That's what they push. That's what they do. Just another, it has nothing to do with MrBeast necessarily. It has nothing to do with the Rockefeller Foundation. But here's an example of the Wexner Foundation, who is also extremely pro-Israel. Here's InfluenceWatch.org analyzing the Wexner Foundation, the Wexner Family Charitable Fund, its sister organization, and its connections to Harvard, where Jeffrey Epstein had an office, I believe. And this is what they advocate for: LGBTQ, climate, racism. And you can just go to the reference section and you can click on the references in this particular article here from InfluenceWatch.org, and you can go and see the sources for these claims, which are all WexnerFoundation.org, Wexner Foundation, official website, the one here that you see on your screen. So if we go back to what this Rockefeller Foundation, MrBeast agreement, partnership is all about, it's about meeting young people online and channeling their desire for purpose into meaningful global action. And I wonder if it's not similar, considering the background of the Rockefeller Foundation, to the Wexner Foundation, which is interested in channeling largely angry, disenfranchised, or at least they feel disenfranchised youth into social justice movements, into movements that are geared toward color revolutions, which are funded by people like George Soros and others. If you go to the internet, type in the Bachelor Billionaire Les Wexner, you can pull up the article where he says that he's actually possessed by a Jewish demon. The article was written by Julie Baumgold. Should be able to pull that article up relatively simple. Here it is on archive.org. You can see the actual article. Back in the 80s, and he says that he was possessed or is possessed by a demon named Dybbuk. So just thinking about this, here it is on the screen. He always wakes up worried because of his Dybbuk, which pokes and prods him and gives him the itchiness of soul that he calls, the word is shpilks. Tried to run away from the demon, didn't work out. Demon always finds him. That's why he was never married, he says. So I want you to think about this for a second. You have another foundation that worked very close. Epstein actually gave a lot of money to the Wexner Foundation. Les Wexner worked very close with Epstein. Human trafficking, blackmail, intelligence operations, CIA, Mossad, British intelligence, etc. The Wexner Foundation is also involved in pushing LGBTQ, climate cult, and racism or multiculturalism, etc. And he says that he is motivated to do all of this stuff. Like his whole foundation, the sister organization, all of that, every bit of it is because he is pushed. That's how he got his wealth, to fund all this. He is pushed to do this stuff by a demon, literally by a demon, by a beast, if you will. So let's go back to the Rockefeller Foundation MrBeast announcement. Strategic partnership announced November 24th, 2025. The strategic partnership is designed to meet young people where they are online and channel their desire for purpose into meaningful global action. Well, we know what that is. We know what those social justice movement, color revolution stuff, we know what that is. We've seen it unfold time and time again across the United States and around the world, where it's basically, like a CIA coup, destabilization, undermining of the rule of law, undermining of the social order. There's a lot of money involved, a lot of power involved. Some people just like to watch the world burn. It's a very complicated and very sophisticated thing. It's kind of hard to really summarize it all, certainly in a few sentences, let alone in a a show, a single show. We can't get into all the details of this. I'm trying to give you just the basic information. But I wanted to show you something else because they're so interested in working with kids. They're so interested in helping children. They're so interested in making sure that kids are finding purpose in the world. I wanted to show you this. One of the people that pioneered sexual research was a guy named Alfred Kinsey, who many of you may have heard of Alfred Kinsey and the 1948 through 1953, I believe it was, Kinsey reports. Alfred Kinsey studied sexual behavior, quote unquote, sexual behavior, essentially revolutionized the ideas, the concepts of sex, gender, etc. And Kinsey, as you can see on your screen, Kinsey was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation to do this. Here is philanthropyroundtable.org. There's so many official websites that confirm this. I pulled up one of the ones that I found just as a point of reference, one of the ones I found when researching tonight's show. Very, very standard history. It's not a controversial history. The Rockefeller Foundation gave grants to Kinsey, thousands of dollars back in the 40s into the 50s. By the end of the 40s, he was making tens of thousands of dollars from the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation was an enthusiastic supporter of Kinsey. They even wrote an introduction to his first book. Kinsey's claims, which were expanded by the 1953 publication of Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, transformed views of popular nature on sex and laid the groundwork for the sexual revolution that followed. So when someone says the Rockefeller Foundation paved the way for feminism or paved the way for sexual liberation, and you go looking for the Rockefeller Foundation, some official statement like, we funded feminism. You don't find that because, like the CIA, they do it through proxies. They do it through financing other individuals or groups. And in this case, they did it through financing Kinsey. And Kinsey, take it a step further, was very inspired in his sexual research, very inspired by Mr. Beast. That is Aleister Crowley, the original Mr. Beast. This is an interesting article on the Catholic Journal that describes Kinsey's love of Aleister Crowley, his connections to Aleister Crowley. So when someone says Aleister Crowley and his sexual perversity spawned, created, led to the sexual revolution, and people say, there's no proof of that. I mean, unless you know the history of Aleister Crowley, most people are like, that guy was just crazy. He didn't work with British intelligence or anything. A lot of this formed the foundation of the Tavistock Institute, too. When you say these things to people, you try to go research them, it's hard to find. Because how did Aleister Crowley contribute to this? Well, he contributed to it by being the inspiration for Kinsey. And Kinsey, inspired by Aleister Crowley, was paid by the Rockefeller Foundation, ended up being millions and millions of dollars to do this sexual research. Kinsey himself was reportedly a homosexual. I wonder how much the Rockefeller Foundation chose to pay him this money to fund his own curiosity in order to use it as a weapon against a stabilized civilization, put it simply. He was inspired by Crowley, though. This is not a debatable thing either. In essence, Aleister Crowley passed the baton of sexual depravity to Alfred Kinsey. And the Rockefeller Foundation paid for his, quote, research. And his research involved children. Dr. Kinsey's research included voyeuristic collections of thousands of case histories where he would, well, just basically make voyeuristic pornography. He was a revolutionary, but he used very unscientific methodology to do it, including the observance of the sexual abuse of children. So let's put this into a capsule. MrBeast, the content creator, teams up with the Rockefeller Foundation, and they want to help children by finding them on the internet, young adults, by finding them on the internet and using their immense wealth and influence and power to help these young people, quote, channel their desire for purpose into meaningful global action. We know that the Wexner Foundation, just as an example, the Wexner Foundation has been around since the 80s. The immense amount of money that goes through the Wexner Foundation from his businesses and from, well, the philanthropy of people like Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein donated lots of money to the Wexner Foundation. And what does the Wexner Foundation do with that money? Well, they channel it into, well, finding people online, young people, and well, convincing them to be trans or convincing them to support LGBTQ or convincing them that the climate is going to deteriorate to the point where we have to live in some kind of underground bunker because we've destroyed the world, give them all the power and pay taxes to the government to fight carbon pollution, racism, making everything about, quote, multiculturalism. All of that's pushed by the Wexner Foundation. And then you find out Wexner's actually inspired by a demon, literally a demon, not metaphoric. He says that he is literally possessed by a demon called dybbuk, which is a Jewish demon. Dybbuk. And then we learn how much the Rockefeller Foundation paid millions of dollars to Alfred Kinsey. And we find out who inspired Alfred Kinsey to do his sexually perverse research, including that which was, I think, over the borderline of pedophilia. And what inspired him to do that was Aleister Crowley, who was British intelligence. Kind of like Epstein was connected to all the intelligence agencies. He was an intelligence asset, at least for the Mossad and the CIA. And Aleister Crowley inspired this. And Aleister Crowley's nickname was also the Beast. So we're dealing with two people named the Beast. We're also dealing with a third person, Alfred Kinsey, who, like Wexner, seems to have been possessed by a demon, who pushed him, who inspired him. Yeah, Aleister Crowley did, but I'm saying figuratively inspired him to research the sexuality of children. Yes, it's very, very innocent, right? Very innocent. Kinsey's personal history is, a lot of it is wrapped up. A lot of it is hard to find, but his biographer, not me, his biographer made a case that he was basically just justifying his carnal cravings under the guise of scientific research, in the same way that Epstein was satisfying his carnal cravings, his perversity, and, of course, his personal research endeavors, including impregnating women at Zorro Ranch to create a race of super humans, or a race of perfect humans with his DNA. This is, if you study Aleister Crowley, this is what you find about Aleister Crowley. He was a drug addict. He was a decent writer, but he was a drug addict. He was a sexual fiend, and he had direct working with connections to British intelligence and directly was connected into the hive. I think it's like a hive mind, if you will, of Hollywood and what was Hollywood at the time and what was really even the early days of, you could say, not necessarily Silicon Valley, but, the tech industries, which were inspirational, all of that. Aleister Crowley was inspirational for NASA, Jack Parsons, Werner von Braun. A lot of these guys cut from the same cloth. I wouldn't say von Braun was cut from the same cloth, but in some ways Jack Parsons was cut from the same cloth. And there's a tremendous amount of interesting history about Jack Parsons and the Crowley Lodge in California and Aleister Crowley's dealings with the military and dealings with including Montauk, his little research experiment there. And then, of course, the more depraved accusations against Crowley, which lived on through the work of the Rockefeller Foundation and Kinsey. So, according to his biographer James Jones, Kinsey was a crypto reformer who turned voyeurism into science. Now, that's interesting because you could type into a search engine Magnus Hirschfeld, and you can find that what Magnus Hirschfeld was doing in the 20s and 30s in Germany was operating the world's first trans clinic. The Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin would have been a century old if it hadn't been a victim of Nazi ideology. Oh, those damn Nazis. They stopped the world's first trans clinic from reaching its 100th birthday anniversary. See, the problem is, this is a Scientific American article, for the record. If you are not watching this video, you're listening to the show, type this in, the forgotten history of the world's first trans clinic. Of course, it's labeled as an opinion piece. And I think the opinion piece would be the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin would be a century old if it hadn't fallen victim to Nazi ideology. It didn't really fall victim to Nazi ideology, if you know the history of it. It really fell victim to a population of Germans who were living in poverty, who were living in filth and a drug-infested, pervert-infested Weimar Republic in the 1920s. And when there was the famous Nazi book burning, quote unquote, do you know what they burned? They burned precisely what was in that library. And as a matter of fact, you could even go to the Holocaust Encyclopedia and you can read that on their website. You can see this on their website. In May of 1933, Nazis looted Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science and destroyed much of the archives in the Berlin book burning. In other words, if you're opposed to the trans ideology of a Magnus Hirschfeld, not only does that make you anti-Semitic, but it makes you anti-gay, anti-queer, anti-lesbian, anti-bi, et cetera, anti-trans. That's the same thing the Wexner Foundation was pushing. They're also pushing LGBTQ. So there's a connection there, not only because Wexner's also Jewish on top of Hirschfeld being Jewish, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, there's a lot of sexual perversity and depravity involved in all of this. But if this was one of those infomercials, but wait, there's more, because there's also the Tavistock Institute. And if you recall, the Tavistock Institute, which a lot of people have probably never heard of, here's the Tavistock Institute. A handful of years ago, the governor of the Tavistock Institute resigned because they said that the Institute was pushing children into these gender identities. In 2019, the governor of Tavistock Foundation quit over a damning report into gender identity. Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS. Marcus Evans, one of the governors of the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, has resigned after accusing its management of having an overvalued belief in the expertise of its gender identity development service, which is used to dismiss challenge and examination. Eva's decision to part company with the London-based trust after a 35-year association will intensify scrutiny of the service, which has found itself in the eye of a storm as thousands of young people considering transitioning to another gender seek its help. Oh, they just want to help. Some parents who contacted the Observer have accused the service of, quote, fast-tracking young people into changing gender, a charge strongly rejected by the service. We don't do that. We don't fast-track them. We put them through a gender identity development service, and we help them to transition. We don't fast-track anybody. Yet the governor resigned because, after decades, because of what they were doing. They had increased their output of trans ideology. And although we don't have time for it tonight, considering where this place is located, it's located in London. It's not really a big surprise considering where did Aleister Crowley come from and who was he connected to? The same exact agencies, the same exact intelligence community, the same exact sexual perverts and psychologists that run the Tavistock Institute today. In fact, Aleister Crowley, Kinsey, the Rockefeller Foundation, and others were instrumental in the background in the setting up the foundation of groups like Tavistock. And then you look into Tavistock further and you find all of the things like at the Wexner Foundation, find all the things that you find that are pushed in social media for young people. That's where they are. They're online and in movies and entertainment and streaming services. It's all the same thing pushed. Disney, Netflix. People find these things and they make videos and they're like, oh my God, look at what Disney's pushing. It's not really a surprise. Look at what Netflix is pushing. It's not really a surprise. You put all these pieces together and you find out that they go back to the same beast. Whether it's MrBeast, or it's Aleister Crowley, or it's David Rockefeller, or if it's any of the Rockefellers, or it's the Central Intelligence Agency, or it's Israeli intelligence, British intelligence, it's the same exact modus operandi, and it's the same exact playbook. It's the same exact story. And it goes back before Kinsey. Kinsey's research, the stuff that Kinsey did for the Rockefeller Foundation that was inspired by Aleister Crowley, was really an outgrowth of, well, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was doing this stuff back in the 20s. In fact, you know what the word transvestite, you know where that comes from? It comes from Germany. Do you know where the first trans surgery was performed? Germany, Berlin, actually. Well, according to the history, it was performed in Berlin. I believe they removed a guy's penis. The story is that he went back and asked to have his penis put back. I think they've made a movie about it. There's a great book actually written on it. It's called Gay Berlin. I think you can probably still find a copy of it. I forget the guy's name who wrote it. Type in Gay Berlin book. I have a copy of it somewhere here on my shelf. Yeah, here it is. The Birthplace of a Modern Identity, written by Robert Beachy. Gay Berlin. Oh, look at that. And you can look up all the old photos of, you can actually type it in right now, Berlin, LGBTQ photos. You can pull up, look at all the cross-dressing and all of the, type in old photos here. All the cross-dressing, all the LGBTQ, they used to have parades. And the thing is, if you go back and you look at the early days of that movement in the 20s, it was a subversive, psychological, communist operation to undermine the German government, to undermine the German, well, more so it was already undermined with the Versailles Treaty, but to undermine the people, to undermine the culture of Germany, which had thwarted a communist overthrow after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And because the Germans had resisted a total communist takeover, they infiltrated in other ways through psychology. Magnus Hirschfeld was one of those people that pushed this garbage So that there was porn peddled, pedophilia, there was, mother-daughter tag team prostitution units. A lot of people were, of course, unemployed and homeless and starving to death. And you can understand why things began to unfold in a different way in the 30s because people rebelled against it. But it was an attack on Germany. It was an attack on the German people. It was an attack on their society, on their economy, on their culture. It was an attack on German people. And that attack on German people is an attack that we've seen orchestrated on pretty much the entirety of civilized society. So why the stuff you see on Netflix and on Disney and other places, all this stuff seems to mirror exactly what happened in the 1920s in Germany. It seems to, whether you're in the UK or if you're in the United States, hell, even if you're over here in Asia, where I am, if you're in Japan, I've done shows where you look at the people that are pushing the multiculturalism, that are pushing LGBTQ, that are pushing climate cults. And they all work for, the United Nations. They work for some affiliate or some association with some foreign government agency, foreign in relation to, Japan. It's the same exact plan everywhere you look. And what did Yuri Bezmenov, former KGB, what did he say? He said that there's a multi-staged process of ideological subversion. How does this ideological subversion work? Those 4 stages in that ideological subversion. One of them is demoralization. I don't think I have to explain to anybody that we are well into the demoralization stage. The demoralization stage, I believe he said, takes approximately, 20 years to employ and to have full effect. Which, if you go look back to 9/11, America changed on that day. And it's been about 20 years since then. He talked about destabilization, destabilizing the economy, foreign relations, defense systems, all of it. I don't have to explain to Americans that we're there. And then engineering crisis after crisis, violent changes of power, economic changes, like the housing issue in 2008, various recessions, and even telling us that recession, that's a word the Republicans made up. We've never used that word before. That's not even a word in the dictionary, recession. Depression? We've never had a depression. There was one in the 20s or something, but that word doesn't exist either. Gaslighting on top of the artificial or the engineered crises that are created over and over and over and over again. And then finally, from demoralization to destabilization, demoralization does destabilize to the crisis, then you get a normalization of that process. The new normal, if you will. You get a normalization of that process. And once that process becomes normalized, once that process becomes, just how things are, well, people, by implication, they get used to it. Once they're used to it, well, you move on to the next stage. Before you know it, there really isn't anything that resembles the country or the culture that you lived in before. But something's wrong. You can't really put your finger on it. Here's Yuri Bezmenov explaining how this works.
And it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. This is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. It's done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. The next stage is destabilization. It takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have normalization. It may last indefinitely. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth.
I promise you.
To destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C.
It's a very lengthy interview. That's just a very small collection of little clips from it. Did you hear Nick Fuentes pushing the elimination? What did Yuri Bezmenov just say there? Because what he's talking about is exactly what Nick Fuentes is
in the
pushing.
United States, if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth.
So the left, the liberals, the progressives promise you all these goodies.
Promise you.
To destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition.
No free market competition. Nick Fuentes is literally pushing that alongside of a Catholic theocracy to run the United States government. And on the other side, you have the Trump administration, and you have J.D. Vance, and you have Curtis Yarvin, who are pushing directly, they are pushing a different kind of theocracy, a religious theocracy, a techno-monarchy, I believe, is what Curtis Yarvin and J.D. Vance believe in. And that would be the continuation of the Big Brother government.
And to put a Big Brother government in Washington, D.C.
Palantir and all of the other agencies like the NSA and the CIA. So all of this we can get out of MrBeast. He's just a random influencer guy. He's a cool guy on the internet. He's got a big smile. He's got some blue tiger logo. He's got a bunch of awards from YouTube. He's going to meet with the Rockefellers. There's no shady history of the Rockefeller Foundation. These are good people. They want to help. Forget about the history of, the oil or the drugs or the Flexner report with modern medicine. Forget about the fact that the Rockefeller Foundation would just, exterminate towns of people if they wanted the land, the resources, the mines, the oil, etc. Forget about all the genocide. Forget about all the extermination. Forget about them financing eugenics. Forget about them financing, all the things that have destabilized, demoralized, and created normalization processes that otherwise would be rejected as immoral and amoral. Forget about all that. MrBeast is a great guy, and the Rockefeller Foundation, they got some brown guy running them now. You can trust them. Yeah, like when you go to the Mars Corporation, the candy company, and they've got all these pictures of like brown kids and Asian kids. Like, look, we love brown kids. We love Asian kids. We love all of these different races and ethnicities of people. We're not evil, as if that's supposed to mean something. Some of you might not know what I'm talking about, but I'm referencing an old show we did on the Mars Corporation, where they actually reached out to us after the fact and offered to pay us a bunch of money to promote their products if we would just be not say anything more about the Mars Corporation. I have the text message to prove that, as a matter of fact. Anyway, it actually kind of reminds me of what Richard Werner just said on the Tucker Carlson show recently. He said that the United States worked to undermine the Japanese economic boom and create the economic crisis that is in Asia. And the reason they did that was because Japan was too powerful economically. They had built too much, and the Western banks couldn't get their fingers into it, specifically the central banks. And so they had to undermine the Japanese economy. It's the same exact thing that the British, same exact thing that Churchill did to the Germans. They had no concern about Nazism. Hitler loved Churchill. He loved the British. The concern was over economic issues, banks. It was over money. It was over, a little bit of social issues, but it was mostly over economics and money. That's why wars are fought. That's why when the Bolsheviks marched into Germany and tried to take over Germany, and the Freikorps put them down, couldn't defeat them, directly. So they infiltrated other sectors of society, economically, socially, etc., and then undermined, destabilized, and demoralized, and then normalized the corruption and the pollution of that society until it bred an equally, I'd be very careful using the word oppressive. I don't like to repeat talking points of history, but an equally aggressive regime in the 1930s. That's what this stuff produces. That's why you see Nick Fuentes saying, hey, no more free market system. We need a Catholic theocracy to run this. That's the extreme of having leftist liberal talking points and ideology jammed down your throat. It's the pendulum swinging the other way. And behind all of this, as we prepare to bring on our guest tonight, behind all of this is psychology. It's behind the quote pandemic too, the COVID pandemic, where we have documents from the UK. We have documents and mainstream news articles about how, admittedly, the governments utilize psychology to torture people. They used fear. They created these nightly stories about death totals and case totals because the appropriate level of fear had not been reached. That's in the record. It's in the documents. It's this. It doesn't matter what you look at. It's all psychology, the perfecting of psychology, the perfecting of psychological tactics, what Yuri Bezmenov was talking about. And our CIA, our government employs them against us. Corporations employ them against us. The media employs them against us. It's the same story over and over and over again. And it's why things continually get worse, despite the fact that you keep voting, despite the fact that you keep trying to do the right thing and nothing seems to change. That's because everything is occupied and controlled. And that might be an overstatement, but based on the evidence we're looking at here, very little of what you see, especially from big content creator influencers, is in any way, shape, or form real. Plus, to top all that off, before we move into hour number 2, remember when the White House paid, under the Biden administration, influencers for COVID propaganda? White House enlists 50 TikTok online users for vaccine promotion. Remember when the Trump White House, I'll pull this up, had mega influencer bots that went out there and defended everything, including Jeffrey Epstein? AI bot network of the Trump administration. Okay, we can't trust the Rolling Stone, though, or NBC News. Okay, well, then I guess you can't trust Business Insider when they reported that the Biden administration did pretty much the same thing. Very little of what you see or hear is honest or in good faith. Most of it, much of it, is pushed by these players. I'm going to now remove our screen share, and I will bring up the next selection of stories as we bring on our guest here in just a moment. Our guest tonight is Ryder Lee from Raised by Giants. You can find him on YouTube. You can also find Ryder on a number of episodes of TST Radio over the years. Ryder and I have been friends and colleagues for several years. And you can find Ryder Lee's various documentaries. I'll let him mention those. You can find those various documentaries on Amazon Prime, if I have that correct. He can correct me if I'm wrong, including JFKX and, a really great documentary about psychological operations in The Shining. I know he's also working on another documentary about remote viewing, and a lot of this ties in with our subject tonight, including what you see on your screen right now. Back in 2022, the U.S. military Fort Bragg PSYOP unit recruitment video. Remember that Ghost in the Machine? And then there was a Ghost in the Machine recruitment video in 2024, a part 2. And now, which is what inspired Ryder and I to start talking, and I prepared tonight's show, was the Fort Bragg Psychological Warfare Group posting another video this year, just a few days ago, another psychological operations, quote, recruitment video. We'll look into that and the connections all of that has to the Central Intelligence Agency and their behavioral sciences, which also includes the Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Report from 1963. And if you read that, you can find pretty much all the techniques and the tactics that are now employed against the American public, or just, I guess, civilians anywhere you look in the world. So let's bring Ryder Lee onto the show. I know he's been waiting patiently behind the scenes, behind the stage. Ryder, thank you for joining me on the show tonight, my friend. Hello, howdy. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am doing great, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it, brother. Always an honor and a privilege being on the Secret Teachings and having really great conversations with you.
Yeah, I love having you on too, especially because over the years you've increased your knowledge and your understanding of the things that we're talking about tonight, like I have, and you've been working to quite literally document these things in documentaries. You have JFKX, you have your Shining documentary, which I thought, as I've told my audience before, I know Clyde Lewis gave you major props on this too. It's an amazing documentary, and it's a very unique look at The Shining. And it's probably something, if people have not watched it or heard the ideas, it's something that is really kind of mind-blowing. The psychological intelligence apparatus behind that, especially when we looked at Lookout Mountain and the connections to Laurel Canyon and all of this. But, you know, your research, your work connects to, I think, everything I've been discussing tonight, from the Rockefeller Foundation, MrBeast, Aleister Crowley, to Wexner Foundation, to the Tavistock Institute. It's all part of the same psychological beast, I think. Your thoughts, your views, your opinions. I'll give you the floor.
Absolutely. I mean, the Rockefeller Foundation, it was involved in a lot of stuff. They've had their hands in a lot of things: public health, scientific community, agriculture, the pushers of the Green Initiative, global warming, the educational system. They had their hand in creating vaccines at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and more specifically, influenza vaccines, polio, measles, malaria, which we know that none of those really cured anything. They just changed the definitions of what those diseases and viruses were. You can look into Dr. Suzanne Humphreys for more information on that. And of course, least we forget, the Rockefeller Foundation was also responsible for our schools and the indoctrination systems and, you know, standardized grade levels. You know, they would do all kinds of stuff like compulsory schooling, centralized state level control. You know, they would shift away from small, more localized schooling and like one-on-one type of schooling to more statewide schooling. They created the State Department of Education. They did the certification requirements for schools. They introduced the first uniform curriculum across states, and they also introduced a very heavy indoctrination into the obedience of law. Don't question your leaders. Don't question your superiors. They know best. And that's just to name a few things of how they created the school curriculum. And the big one of that, which a lot of people often cite, was from Frederick Taylor Gates, not Bill Gates, Frederick Taylor Gates, which was involved with the Rockefeller Foundation. And this is a quote from him, which was wanting schools that would produce workers rather than independent psychological thinkers, which is a heck of a quote there. But it wasn't only just public schools. They also did this with colleges as well, such as Columbia, Yale, Harvard. So out of all of the foundations and the companies that MrBeast could have partnered with, he goes with the Rockefeller Foundation, right? That's done so much to help everyone globally, Ryan. They've done so much. They've helped people in South Africa, like he mentioned in the video with MrBeast. You know, they've really helped out a lot. I 100% believe that they have our best interests, you know, but it's just interesting how MrBeast kind of went from this self-made, self, you know, pulling himself up by his bootstraps and doing all this great investment stuff, which is another really interesting thing because I remember around 2023, because you just mentioned that the White House had paid a bunch of people. I'm pretty sure that MrBeast was one of those people that got paid by the Pentagon or by the White House. Now, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember what it was for, but I think it was for some kind of content creation. I would have to go back and look at the episode that I did on MrBeast surrounding his TV show on Hulu. Because there was this period of time where people all over the internet was saying that MrBeast was the Antichrist. Do you remember this?
I do remember that. Yeah, probably just because of the name and maybe a hand gesture.
And there was this really weird thing with a TV show that he did on Hulu that was like a series where he was going to give away $1 million. They had this like religious guy on there that was like heavily religious that would pray before he did everything. There was this one point in the show where he had to make a decision to let a bunch of people go on to the next stage of the competition. So he was basically the chooser. So he got on his knees. He made this giant beard. They referred to him like as like the Jesus figure of the show because he was heavily Christian, and he got on his knees and he prayed. He prayed to God, and that was the cliffhanger of that episode of who he was going to pick as his disciples to move on to the next phase of the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all around this time of when people were like, yeah, MrBeast is the Antichrist. Which everyone has been called the Antichrist, I think, at one point in time. Peter Thiel is now the Antichrist. Trump has been called the Antichrist. Everyone that has had any kind of popularity has been called the Antichrist. I mean, even Joe Rogan has been called the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley. Have you heard that one?
Of course, yeah, because he's bald, right? Looks like him. I've heard that one, yes.
Yeah, so it's just interesting how MrBeast decided to partner with the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, there's hundreds of other organizations and foundations that he could have partnered with, but he chose this one that has the best interest in everyone's heart, Ryan. So it's just, and that's the thing is like, they want to make him out to be like this guy, like started from the bottom, you know, and did all this stuff and would just give things away, give money away. That's how he started out, was on social media, on like Facebook and stuff. That's how I first ran into some of his content, was on Facebook Reels, where he would just walk into a McDonald's and have someone do a challenge and then give them like $3,000 to $5,000 like off of the rip. You know, it's like,
you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Black Mirror. There's something Black Mirror-y about him. I don't know if that makes sense. I know you watch that show. Something that just seems like it's not real.
I think you described it perfectly in this in the beginning of the show when you said that he's looking like he's trying to smile. That's a perfect analytical representation that you could give. That's the way that he looks all the time. It looks like he's trying to smile. And that's that eerie type of feeling that a lot of people have, just like the Rockefellers. You know, Aleister Crowley has got that type of look about him as well, like he's got a secret, or that he's hiding back something, or that, you know, there's something more going on than what meets the eye. Like very mysterious type of oblique type of face that he has on all the time, which is, you know, I don't know exactly what that is, which is probably what leads people to think that he's the Antichrist.
Well, maybe he's a personification or possessed by the spirit of the Antichrist. I mean, this is like what I've said with Les Wexner. You look at Les Wexner, and he literally says that he's possessed by a demon. It's not metaphoric. It's not figurative. It's not someone else's opinion. He literally says he's possessed by a demon, And that through this demon, that's how he's gotten wealthy. And through that wealth, through the Wexner Foundation, that's how he's funded all of these movements that are just like what the Tavistock Institute promotes, just like what the Rockefeller Foundation promotes, just like what all of the other philanthropists and NGOs and united groups and nations, and we love people and want to help you. It's the same thing everybody promotes. So, I mean, what are the connections to that is what I started thinking. And then you look at the history of Aleister Crowley, who was inspiration for Alfred Kinsey, who worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, in promoting what amounted to sexual degeneracy and perversity, which then takes us to the work of people like Magnus Hirschfeld, who did the exact same thing in Germany. And it was connected to left-wing progressivism, which is precisely what you see today. As I said earlier, the world's first trans clinic was in Germany. In fact, there was just a story that came out the other day about Les Wexner being in the Epstein estate documents. I can show you that on the screen, which brings the Epstein story into the equation, because Epstein it wasn't just Epstein. It was a network of intelligence agencies, the same ones that when the CIA got caught back in, what was it, the 60s, funding coups and funding the undermining, like Yuri Bezmenov said, the demoralization, destabilization of countries and other things around the world. They got caught doing that. So then they started dumping money into organizations and foundations, which included ... the Rockefeller Foundation. And I can actually show you, I don't know if you've seen this document. I'm assume that you have, or it's not surprising to you. Here's a document from the Central Intelligence Agency. You can see this on your screen. Foundations support for research, or foundation support for research in the field of the behavioral science. What is behavioral science? It's psychology. And if you scroll down through this list, what do you find? Other than the Ford Foundation, you find the Rockefeller Foundation. So the CIA was financing the Rockefeller Foundation to carry out their work. And then we can add one more thing to that equation. Here is an article from the New York Times back in the 80s. And if you scroll down in this article, the article is called Missionaries for Democracy, U.S. Aid for Global Pluralism. And if you scroll down in this article, you can find a really interesting little piece here. As I scroll down the article and find it. Here's the section here. I'm going to read this to you. It says, from covert to overt evolution of policy, we should not have to do this kind of work covertly, said Carl Gershman, president of the endowment, who was an aide to Jean J. Kirkpatrick when she was the chief United States delegate to the UN. It would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to see, or to be seen, as subsidized by the CIA. We saw that in the 60s, and that's why it has been discontinued. We have not had the capability of doing this, and that's why the endowment was created. So the CIA was prevented from doing their work, and so they started financing, this is in their own records, they started financing the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, etc.
Private government contractors. I mean, that's how it's always went. That's how it went with MK Ultra. That's exactly what they did once they the whistle kind of got blown on that in 1975. They were like, okay, well, how do we, continue this research? I know, we'll just contract this out to government contractors and private organizations and different companies that they can do the research for us. And then that's whenever it gets shipped into Canada.
Yes.
At what was that? Hayfork? No, not Hayfork. We had it in a Clockwork Shining. The doctor up there that basically created what he called psychic driving, and how what was it? Haystack.
The name
Ravenscraig. Sorry, it's called Ravenscraig. And he created the psychic driving, so the depowdering, the psychic driving, and then it's pretty much like to erase your normal thinking patterns, which is the depowdering, and then feed you drugs, and then psychically drive you to make you believe something happened or make you not believe something happened. It can go either way, right? And that's done through repeated visual stimulus or repeated audio messages. It works in both of those ways. So if you can think about that and just take, VR goggles. We know that the military has been using VR to train their people using video games and VR for a really, really long time. They've been doing that forever. Like video simulations of blowing up tanks, killing people. They will literally have a gun that is just as heavy as a real gun and have a simulation of targets and have you shoot those targets. They've been doing that for a really long time, along with video games and VR. So now you think of that in the context of an MK Ultra style program. If you depattern the person, which is normally done through torture, so you would torture them to a degree to where they lose all of their cognitive abilities and critical thinking. Then you drug them, and then you could put a freaking VR goggles over them and make them believe that any scenario is essentially real. You could reprogram their mind to make them believe that extraterrestrials are real, whatever, alien abductions are real, which it comes into another thing. I don't want to get on the alien. We've done UFOs and aliens into the ground here, but there was this book that was written by this gentleman named Walter H. Ballard, in 1978, called Operation Mind Control, that basically exposes the entire alien and abduction phenomenon, where he wrote that the military would get these kids dressed up in gray alien outfits, and the military would abduct whatever individual, whoever they wanted, to make them believe that aliens had abducted them. And the kids would act as aliens. They would have the set all made up, make it seem very realistic. And then they would use these drugs and this weapon that they refer to as like a stun gun, which has been used in a lot of MK Ultra programs, where they can just hit you with a gun and it knocks you out and makes you go into this like psychotic delusions, like you've been drugged. And then whenever you wake up, it's like it was all like a big, huge blur. And then he talks about how that these people will later on, these memories will come back up in their life later on, and they'll remember them as alien abduction experiments, like that they were abducted by aliens. So if it can go that far, just like with the NSA breaking into Paul Benoit's house and replacing his computer with a NSA modified computer to make him believe that he's in communication with aliens, if they will go that far to pull off some sort of deception operation, then there's no extent to how far they'll go with anything else.
Well, look at this, for example. So, our audience, I think, knows, but just for the record, the definition of parapsychology is the study of alleged psychic phenomena. That's a Wikipedia article. I don't trust them, so we could go to like Psychology Today or Encyclopedia Britannica. But basically, parapsychology is defined as the paranormal or psychic phenomena. And here is CIA and behavioral sciences, their mind-controlled drug experiments in MK Ultra. This is their records that they released 2024. We could look at that in a little bit. And then look at this, back to the document we were looking at a few minutes ago, Foundation Support for Research, CIA. And here's the Rockefeller Foundation, which included money into the work of parapsychology. I'll zoom in so you can see that. Parapsychology work at the Rockefeller Foundation, right there on the bottom of your screen. And there's the Rockefeller Group getting money for that. Grants to study parapsychology, which tells me that that involves, along with the the study of gifted individuals. You can see that at the Rockefeller Foundation. That tells me that what you're saying is certainly backed up by CIA records, that they're not saying fake alien abductions or UFOs or something like this, but they're investing tremendous amounts of money officially just in this one document into studying, quote, gifted individuals, and into studying parapsychology, which is the real true root basis of the TV show Stranger Things. It's really based on these programs. Whether or not they were successful, they still researched them, and to what extent or level they actually went to, like with the Paul Benowitz story. I'm not saying that's connected to the Rockefeller Foundation, but like with Paul Benowitz, we don't know, but we know that this stuff was for sure absolutely done.
What year was this that they were studying parapsychology and the kids? Well, not the kids, but the gifted individuals.
This particular report was approved for release in 1999. So let's see, the parapsychology work, Rockefeller, 1951. Gifted children, Rockefeller, through Stanford University, 1951.
This is really early on.
Yeah, this was very early on, and parapsychology was done at Duke University. And again, this is just one of many, many documents. But yes, this was two major
Yeah,
universities.
this is 100% legit. This is I actually have this section in my latest documentary, Psychic Agent, where this funding was going on from the it went to Duke University, it went to Stanford, it went to Yale, it went to Boston, and a few other places to study parapsychology and psychic abilities and gifted individuals, which then later on became known as remote viewing. And then the CIA funded Stanford Research Institute in 1972, which that first program was called Scan8. Scan8, which was to determine if the parapsychology, if this psychic ability actually is real, and if it is real, how can it be used as a military effort? Can we use this ability to spy on foreign countries and gather information? And then it turned out that what they found with people like Ingo Swann and Pat Price in 1972 at Stanford Research Institute, and then that's when Pat Price essentially broke into that Cold War surveillance military base, top secret military base in West Virginia with his mind, and got all that top secret information. And that's the CIA funded SRI from that period of time, and then they cut funding in 1975 when after Pat Price died. And then Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff then went to the Foreign Technology Division in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio to get funding from the Air Force to pick up where the CIA had left off in 1975. And then they funded it all the way up until 1980. And then in 1979, the Air Force, the Army, INSCOM, and DIA had an interest in it. And then that's whenever they funded their first program, which then began operations in 1980, right after they had shut down that small remote viewing unit at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1980, whenever they found the missing downed Russian airplane in Africa. A lot of this is spelled out in my new documentary that I'm working on, Psychic Agent, the real life Stranger Things. Have Dale Graff in it, which was responsible. He was the head of that remote viewing unit at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was an unofficial unit, but Rosemary Smith, which was a part of that unit, was the person that found that downed Russian airplane that went missing in Africa. She gave them the exact spot on the map where she saw where the airplane was, and then they converted that into a coordinate, and then a team went to retrieve the airplane, and they found it. So that's just a little bit of history and a little bit of background of the remote viewing unit. But also, though, MK Ultra is involved because there was not only, they were also studying parapsychology as well, because they found out that trauma within people also activate these psychic abilities within people. So it's kind of repressed in a lot of people's mind. But then whenever they go through that trauma, then they're all of a sudden those abilities start to come to the forefront of their mind. And that's where our documentary comes in about The Shining and how A Clockwork Shining. That's where it kind of activates, through Danny's trauma of Jack abusing him and breaking his arm. That's whenever he starts having these episodes, is what they call it in the beginning of the movie, The Shining. Whenever the doctor comes to visit Wendy and Danny at their apartment in Boulder, Colorado, the doctor asked Wendy and was like, "Hey, when did he first start having these types of episodes?" And she said it was right after Jack had come home really late one night, and Danny had spewed his papers and everything all over the floor, and then Jack came in and yanked him up by the arm and injured Danny's arm. Then he started having these episodes where displaying these psychic abilities, essentially. So that's telling you that trauma is what activates these abilities within people. And we're actually probably getting ready to see, I'm only a couple of episodes in on the new Welcome to Derry series on HBO, but that has a tie-in to The Shining as well. Dick Halloran is actually in the Welcome to Derry series, which is a psychic guy in The Shining that communicates to Danny in his mind, and then finds out Danny is having a really bad time, and then comes and then Jack kills him with an axe. For anybody that's seen The Shining, but there's a connection there too, and I'm willing to bet that it somehow revolves around the traumatization of people. And almost all of these remote viewers, like Ingo Swann, one of the more famous remote viewers, said that he would have out-of-body experiences all the time whenever he was growing up, and that was due to the trauma that he was enduring from other people bullying him because he was gay. Okay, so he would be out of his body all the time because of the trauma that he was enduring. Like, who cares if you're gay? I don't give a shit. I don't care if you're gay. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But what is important is that he had a lot of trauma growing up. So that was that out-of-body experience that he was having. And then that also gets into the Monroe Institute and how they were trying to induce an out-of-body experience through the hemisync mind tapes.
Well, that's probably... Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, that's probably just a way to open up your mind, probably funded, and I'm going to get into it in my more recent documentary, but I think we talked about it on one of the last shows that we did. People are remembering hearing these gateway tapes in like public school as well. So it's like, it's a way to infiltrate into your mind without actually having to really do any work. I think that it's a disharmonic frequency that these tapes actually are. And it's like it's a gateway, but not a good gateway. It's a bad gateway. It's opening up a back door in order for you to be more susceptible to mind control.
See, that makes me think that what you're saying is definitely connected to Alfred Kinsey, because Alfred Kinsey, I think, and I mean, he was probably a pretty smart guy in some ways, but he was also himself homosexual, and he probably went through, especially for the time period, he went through a lot of, if anybody knew he was homosexual, he went through a lot of probably trauma. And then he was inspired by none other than who inspires a lot of people who have been traumatized or abused or whatever. That is Aleister Crowley. And so here's a guy who is attracted to Aleister Crowley, the drugs, the sex, the rituals, the perception of power. We know Aleister Crowley was British intelligence, among other things. And Alfred Kinsey's attracted to that. And so the Rockefeller Foundation, very official suits, very official statements, you can trust the Rockefellers, went to a guy who was an outcast, essentially, sexually from society, a guy who was attracted to very niche things like weird Aleister Crowley sex rituals, and said, we'll give you millions of dollars. There's like tens of millions in the 40s in today's money. We'll give you tens of millions of dollars to study the effects of sexuality on people, which I'm sure filtered into the CIA's Project Midnight Climax, where they just picked up people, put them on drugs, watched them have sex with prostitutes. That's the CIA. That's all part of this too. And then they're able to weaponize the research and what they get out of that as part of the demoralization and destabilization processes, plus what Alfred Kinsey was involved in, and what Aleister Crowley and the CIA and the Rockefeller Foundation were involved in, is, as I said, the exact same thing. I mean, quite literally the same exact thing that we saw in the 20s in Germany under Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science. And now we find that present in the Tavistock Institute today. For the Tavistock Institute, as I showed earlier, the Tavistock Institute has for several years been, I think, relatively publicly known, but for people like us, we've known about it longer. But a handful of years ago, back in 2019, the Tavistock Institute, one of the governors working there, quit because they said, and along with a lot of parents, they said that the kids that were there were being essentially psychologically abused and, quote, fast-tracked to gender transitions. So it's the same exact thing, no matter where you look, whether it's in Germany or it's in the UK or it's in the US. It's the Rockefeller Foundation, the CIA. It is these individual institutes or groups, like with Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science, or now we have the Tavistock Institute. And I'm wondering, back to you, Ryder, I'm wondering, because I honestly have a little bit of a difficult time figuring out how I feel about this. How does this unfold historically? Like when the CIA or when the Rockefeller Foundation or when they discover something, like the power of trauma in inducing psychic experiences, or what we classify as parapsychology, or when you find out that, inducing trauma on a population has this kind of effect, like, what do? Do they sell that information? Do they go directly to the media and through their agents and inject certain things into the population? Is it done through Netflix nowadays? Like, how does all of that unfold? I think you've got a pretty good viewpoint on that. If you could maybe help me iron this out.
Do you remember Barack Obama talking about the conspiracy theory stuff?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I actually have the clip here. I think we need to listen to it again. I'll pop it up here on the screen because this is very telling. This is almost identical to the clip that you played earlier.
President Barack Obama, speaking yesterday at Stanford University, he warned of the dangers of unchecked online disinformation.
And it's not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions. You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.
Well, that kind of sounds like this, Ryder. Remember this clip from George Bush? Oh, I got an advertisement here in Japanese. Hold on a second. Remember that quote from George Bush, though, the statement he said, you gotta repeat things, and in my line of work, to kind of catapult the propaganda. You got to repeat things over and over again to catapult that propaganda. Take a listen.
No, but I want to hear that. I definitely want. It's for sure something that he would say.
Here's the video clip of it for audio listeners. Here it is.
If you've retired, you don't have anything to worry about. It's the third time I've said that. I'll probably say it 3 more times. See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
Yeah, let's clap. That's great. It's great. One of many George Bush clips that are similar to that.
That's essentially exactly what psychic driving is. It's repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again. Regardless if it's true, regardless if it's factual or not, regardless if it's false. Doesn't matter. Whatever thing that you want out there imprinted upon the psyche of everyone globally, you just continue to say it. You continue to put it up on the screen. You continue to talk about it, and you drive that narrative home until people believe it. I mean, the best example of that is what happened in the last 5 years. That's exactly what that was. That was a giant, long preparation time for us to, and they wouldn't have done it, Ryan, if they didn't think that they could get away with it.
Well,
They
here's an
wouldn't have done
example.
it if they thought that they were going to fail.
And here's an example of what you're talking about. I'm glad that you said that. We can seamlessly transition into this article that I pulled up from the British Medical Journal. This piece says opinion, but note that what they're referencing are from actual people, psychologists and government officials in the UK who work directly on COVID policy in the UK and what they said. So the headline of this British Medical Journal is the UK government's attempt to frighten people into COVID protective behaviors was at odds with its scientific advice. Oh, it's just an opinion piece, right? Well, among the many revelations from recent leaked UK government WhatsApp messages published by the Daily Telegraph is the fact that Matt Hancock, former health secretary, not an opinion, proposed using fear in order to get the public to comply with COVID restrictions. That's not an opinion. That's what he actually said. In December 2020, he wrote that, quote, "We must frighten the pants off of everyone with the new strain." That's a quote. In January 2021, Hancock discussed how to increase levels of mask wearing and worried that minor interventions would have little impact. The cabinet secretary, Simon Case, replied, "I think that is exactly right. Small stuff looks ridiculous. Ramping up messaging, the fear and guilt factor, or the fear-guilt factor, is vital." By the way, on top of that, you might say, well, that's just the UK. Well, how about the United States? How about Yale University? Here's Yale University teaming up with, I believe it was a number of medical schools from, what was it? University. I think that there was the University of, I thought it was New York, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But this is the Yale University report. Look at this. This is a great report. Persuasive messaging to increase COVID vaccine uptake intentions. Here's the various different groups involved: School of Nursing, Study of American Politics, Department of Political Science, Yale University. And if you scroll down, you can find this wonderful list of ways in which they intended to get you to take your medicine. They included self-interest messages, community messages, community interest and guilt messaging, interest and embarrassment, community anger, like people are going to be mad at you if you don't do what everyone else is doing. That was the messaging. You got to do what's best for the community. How would you feel if your neighbor died or your grandma died because you didn't get your shot? One of their messages was, you can read that, Ryder, trust in science. Quite literally, trust the science was a Yale University corporate medical talking point, not based on science, but based on psychology. This included personal freedom, economic freedom, and community economic benefits. We heard all those arguments like, don't you want to go to the movies again? Don't you want to go to the games again, the sporting events? Don't you want to go back to work and make money and pay your bills? That was all part of a psychological operation ran through Yale University to convince you to do something for a corporation. And that's
You know what's interesting about that, Ryan? What's interesting about that is it seems like nobody actually wanted to do any of that because all of those industries are failing. The movie industry is failing. The restaurant business is failing. There's been thousands of restaurants, big chain restaurants, that have closed in the past year.
Well, maybe
Buffalo Wild Wings.
that's the
Like,
normalization process, though. I think probably what you're saying. That's like what Bezmenov said. You normalize these, you destabilize, demoralize, you create crisis. This was the crisis, and then you normalize the results, which were during COVID. What were we told over and over again?
Stay home.
And the new normal. That's the new normal. The new normalization process. And you're right. All those things they're changing dramatically because of what happened during the pandemic. And it was all psychology, not based on medical science, but based on brain science, based on the psychology of the mind.
Well, we know what it was really based on, Ryan. We can call it for what it is. It was based on computer models, just like how everything is based on computer models. Global warming, computer models. How many times how can we know how many people are going to die from this virus in the next 5 months if all this stuff is? How do we figure that out? Computer model. You guessed it, bro. Like, it's completely ridiculous.
Here's the Pfizer website confirming that Pfizer's novel prediction model derived from machine learning. That's just one of many. You can actually find the original response back to the accusations of gain-of-function research, where they, here's the Pfizer response to gain-of-function research claims. And if you scroll down, it says that, hey, we don't do that. We don't do that kind of research because most of this work is conducted using computer simulations. It says that on their website. It's unbelievable, right? It's Pfizer.com. You made that up. No, it's Pfizer.com. It says that. It's computer models. But you see all that stuff, Ryder. And then look, here's another document. This is the Kubark counterintelligence interrogation document from the CIA, 1963. It was released in the 1990s. And if you scroll down and you look at the coercive counterintelligence interrogation techniques, this is the same kind of a thing that we saw during COVID. It's the same type of techniques. And for example, utilizing threats and fear, quite literally. Like they're using CIA interrogation torture tactics on the general public. Heightened suggestibility and hypnosis as your nightly news. There's your social media. Just a couple of examples, but that's all from the CIA's, the federal government's Kubark counterintelligence interrogation program, which of course we learned later that we were quite literally torturing people to get information that led to absolutely nothing. But that's a whole nother show. I wanted to, before we're out of time, Ryder, talk about these recruitment videos this is from Fort Bragg. The first article, this is Army Times. This is back in 2022. The Ghost in the Machine, Who's Pulling the Strings video. Then you have Ghost in the Machine 2. That was 2024. And then recently, this last week, they've released a third video. It's another fourth psychological operations group. This video says, "We are everywhere." We can actually play these videos, but do you have a comment on those fast before we play the videos?
Well, I just think that this new one is really interesting because you can't find really the full video anywhere. That's the original Ghost in the Machine. But if you scroll down a little bit, you would see that there's screenshots from other videos, which leads me to believe that this isn't a public thing, because deception operations normally go to people that are already in the military. They're not going to take somebody off the street that just signed up to be in the Army and immediately put them into a deception operation where they're deceiving and running psyops on people. They're just not going to do that. There's too much risk involved. So this one seems more like something, because it's not the entire video. The Ghost in the Machine videos are like 2 to 3 minutes long videos. This one with the new one is, I think that it's like 23 seconds, and it cuts off 37 seconds. Sorry, and it cuts off like as he's getting ready to say, "There's very little things that people think about when they think of operations or whatever," and he was like, "It's in its words." How powerful words are. Yeah,
you're right. The third one is very short. I think we can play about 7 minutes total, roughly, over all three of them. So play these, comment, and wrap up the show tonight. Here's Ghosts in the Machine. Even if you can't see this, you can hear it. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. Pretend to be weak, that he may grow arrogant. Sun Tzu. This video is really creepy, Ryder.
Yeah.
As the world watches and listens in horror, the peaceful pro-democracy demonstration in China comes to a violent and bloody end. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The question is asked, who's pulling the strings?
Wolves
Grand chessboard.
Kissinger. Whispering, do or die. Around
Born from the ashes A world at war. You'll find us in the shadows.
You say your
A
last
threat rises in the east.
while I
Warfare is evolving. And all the world's a stage. Hey, what did the Mossad say? Through deception, we wage
There
war.
is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the mind of the enemy.
Target psychological warfare is against the enemy's mind.
It is words and ideas.
Ammunition used by cyber.
Its mission is to influence the thoughts of the enemy soldier, and at the same time
is expected and encouraged to study
Deceive,
foreign languages
persuade,
and the social sciences such as history,
change,
economics, and sociology. He must have a
influence.
broad and sympathetic understanding of all phases of human experience.
gripping at my skin, the walls of night closing.
We come in many
But
forms.
the use of this force as an integral part of combat has now taken on new form.
We are everywhere.
Say my last goodbye.
A feeling in the dark. A message in the stars. Revolution. The grand chessboard. Ghosts in the machine. What are we? We are war. You get out of that a lot of color revolutions and destabilizations of governments and overthrowing of those same governments. If you have any thoughts on that real quick, and we'll play the second video. It's about 3 minutes, so we have to be quick on time, but go ahead if you do.
But if you realize that during that video, none of that was U.S. events. They were all events.
International events.
International events, right? Because if we're, it's okay if we're doing it to all these other people.
Yeah,
right?
if we do.
But to
Hey,
our
Greg.
own people, we would never do this to our own country.
Never. I'm a little man, and this is a little town. There must be a spark in little men that can burst into flame. John Steinbeck.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand.
The most powerful weapon
But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people
in the hand of the oppressor
Freedom is indivisible.
is the
And
mind of
when
the
one
oppressed.
man is enslaved, all are not free.
Modern war has become a struggle for men's minds as well as for their bodies. Today we face an enemy who spends enormous sums of money and manpower all over the globe in attempts to subvert the thinking of the people of the free world, confuse, divide, and ultimately to subjugate.
It is a contest unlike any we have ever faced in our history as a nation.
Contest for the minds and hearts of people around the world.
When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda. It is a form of truth.
Behind every idea,
Find that control of emotions can be gained by understanding the stimulus response pattern.
a belief.
Many everyday things become associated with these primary stimuli, partly by a process called conditioning.
Behind every
The
choice,
strange, shadowy world, the doctored photograph, the misquotation, insinuation, and the lie.
invisible hands.
I think of fire next to the emotion.
Behind every emotion, fire. Do you believe in the power of words and ideas?
You've got to get a hold of yourself. We'll light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
We believe.
Yes, modern
Cyborg.
warfare, our military leaders are finding that words and ideas are highly effective weapons.
Words and ideas are highly effective weapons. We'll play a very short clip of the last one here and then finalize our comments. If this one will, yeah, here we go. This one will play.
Goddamn army.
Loudspeakers and pamphlets being dumped from planes, war-torn countries, occupied countries.
There's another force applied in combat that we generally don't think of as a weapon of war. That weapon is words. Words are weapons.
Anything we touch is a weapon.
Telling the truth is the only way in which to influence people.
This is psychological warfare.
This is psychological warfare. All right, we have a very short time left on the show. Ryder, your final closing comments, please.
Well, did they just basically say that all of those events were psychological operations?
That's the impression you get from all three videos. Yes, the demoralization, the stabilization, the crises, the normalization, the overthrowing of governments, the undermining of regimes, the destabilization of the global society to move the chessboard and move the pieces around into a position that you want them in. It's all a psychological operation. That's the impression that you get.
So I guess my question would be, if we are doing that to all these other countries, who's doing that to us?
That's a great question that's kind of explored in that that movie Leave the World Behind. You know, these pamphlets raining down on the cities, and some are in Arabic, some are in Korean, some are in, you know, different languages. We don't know who our enemy is. We have no idea who the enemy is. Could be in our own government.
That's what it seems like, because with these videos, it seems like that the military is taking responsibility for all of these foreign events everywhere. Like, they showed events from everything in there, all over the place. Okay, so if the military is taking responsibility for all of those events being psychological operations, who is responsible for the psychological operations that are happening inside of the United States? And if it is our own government and it is our military, which would be the correct way to look at it, if we are responsible for it happening everywhere else, why would we not be responsible for it happening on our own turf? Then something is very clearly wrong. If people watch this and say, "Oh, well, it's okay that we did all this stuff to all these other different countries," okay, and not look at it like, did we do this to ourselves? Are we currently doing this to ourselves inside of our own country? If you watch that and you look at it as, oh, well, it's okay that we did it everywhere else. It's fine. It's justifiable that we overthrew this other government. We did all these other psychological operations. We took out foreign leaders. We installed a new political government over there and overseas in a completely different country. But whenever it happens here, who's to blame when it happens here?
And it's very clearly happening and has been happening here for a long time. It's probably a mixture of foreign governments, but it's also mostly our own intelligence agencies, our own corporations. It's a blend of those operations that are psychological mixed with political ideologies, subversive ideologies. And I guess it's the old adage, when you play with fire, you tend to get burned. I think at the very least, it's that. We've played with fire and we're getting burned. So who is like unto the beast? There's a lot of beasts. You make that decision, the final conclusion for yourself. Ryder Lee, thank you for coming on the show tonight. Ryder Lee is the host of Raised by Giants. He has a number of documentaries. Very quickly, where can listeners find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Raised by Giants, on Facebook at Raised by Giants, Instagram Raised by Giants Pod, and X at Raised by Giants 8, and watch my documentaries JFKX on Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus, and Tubi, and as well as A Clockwork Shining on those exact same platforms. And be looking forward to my latest documentary that I'm currently working on that should be submitted at the first of the year. Thanks so much for having me on, brother. Really appreciate it. Always an honor and a privilege being on here and talking with you, brother.
You as well, Ryder. I appreciate the work that you do. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. All right, tstradio.info is our website. If you would like to support the show, you can find all the links below or on the website I just gave you. rdgable@yahoo.com is the email. And if you would like to support us in any way through either the Buy Me a Coffee option for the show or the subscription archive, please consider doing so and don't wait. Don't allow others to, or don't rely on others to support shows like this. We've been on air for 15 years, very, very long time because of listeners like you. And we can do video shows on occasion because of that. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. And I will talk to you on the next broadcast. Have a great night.